In Voices from Chernobyl, The Oral History of a Nuclear Disaster by Svetlana Alexievich, the author interviews people who lived in Pripyat. One of these interviews, a woman named Ludmila, recalls a nurse telling her, "He's got 1,600 roentgen, a measurement of radiation. 400 is a lethal dose. You're sitting next to a nuclear reactor." My name's Elizabeth, and I've done past research and studying on Chernobyl and its meltdown. This wave of radiation also affected distant relatives living in other parts of Ukraine at the time. So how did one of Chernobyl's reactor cores explode? What were its effects in Ukraine? And how did it affect other countries as well? Chernobyl has been burning in the abandoned city of Pripyat for 34 years. So here's how it all started. The Chernobyl accident in 1986 was the result of a flawed reactor design that was operated with inadequately trained personnel. Chernobyl accident 1986 article. This reactor was also never used outside of the USSR, and it was rejected everywhere outside of the Soviet Union. The reactor is an RBMK 1000 model that resulted in an overload of power to the coefficient, leaving the reactor core unstable. Several operator errors resulted in a buildup of steam pressure, causing the 1,000-ton cover plate of the reactor to become partially detached, resulting in a chain of technical failures, causing an explosion to the core that sent dangerous fission particles into the atmosphere. Seconds later, a second explosion occurs, spitting radioactive graphite out. During the buildup to the first explosion, water was being dumped into the core in an attempt to cool it, only leading to more steam pressure. At the time, it was thought to be scientifically impossible for a reactor core to explode. The particles released into the atmosphere and water were absolutely catastrophic. All of Ukraine was impacted by this disaster. Large quantities of radioactive substances were released into the air for about 10 days. The United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation reported 6,848 cases of thyroid cancer linked to radiation in 1991 and 2005. These high levels of radiation led to cancer and birth defects. Ludmila also recalls in her interview how her daughter passed away the same day she was born due to cirrhosis of the liver and congenital heart disease. Pripyat had a sudden and mandatory evacuation, and particles in the air traveled across Ukraine. This posed a serious problem for Gorbachev, president of the Soviet Union. You can see him right on the right. President of the Soviet Union at the time, and this left room for question of the president and the regime's credibility. Authorities also withheld information from the public, leaving them very unaware of what was happening. However, Ukraine was not the only country affected by the radiation released from Chernobyl. Neighboring countries and even the United States was affected by the Chernobyl explosion. Radioactive particles traveled through the air and water and contaminated crops, which were consumed by livestock, which was then consumed by people, and transported all throughout Europe. In 2011, the UN Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation say that radioactive materials have been widely dispersed and deposited throughout the Northern Hemisphere. Also, in 2015, Oxford Journal also states that contaminated ground was found in varying amounts in every country within the Northern Hemisphere. So under these circumstances, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant suffered multiple explosions due to poor design and operation. Areas in Ukraine were evacuated while thousands of its people were unknowingly being exposed to radiation, which swept across the entire Northern Hemisphere, leaving its trace behind. Reactor 4 of Chernobyl is still burning today, releasing radioactive particles inside of a sarcophagus within the abandoned city of Pripyat. I remember picking up Alexievich's book at the Strand bookstore in New York City and reading it the whole car ride back home to North Carolina. Her book is full of countless touching stories that I recommend everyone pick up and read as well. And this is Svetlana Alexievich right here. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry, you're here first.
Why is it on the map that affected Western Europe but didn't go into Russia?
So I think it was just the placement of the actual reactor. I would say it did definitely travel into Russia and the neighboring countries, and because they were all in this Soviet Union regime, there was a lot of communication going on between them, but not the people. But it definitely did spread to Russia. I'm not sure exactly why it did not spread as much, but it did definitely spread across all of those neighboring countries. Any other questions? Yep.
You still see nuclear energy as like way forward.
So he was asking if I see nuclear plants as a danger to climate change. Is that what you're asking?
What should, like, do you think we should use?
Okay, do I think I should? Okay. I personally do not think that we should use nuclear energy. I think it is too dangerous. A little bit after this, there was also a nuclear meltdown in Japan as well that completely contaminated all of the water in the surrounding area. I think personally, it's just too dangerous. Any other questions?
Good job.
I don't know what happened to my slides. I also have the book. I think I have it in my backpack.